So, what could a lion on the savannah possibly have in common with, say, a tiny fish in a pond? Well, they both have to follow a strict set of hidden rules. And I'm not talking about rules we made up. These are fundamental laws of energy that control everything. They decide who eats what, how many of them can exist, and pretty much how their entire world holds together. So today, we're going to follow that energy. And right away, that brings us to this big, central mystery. I mean, have you ever wondered why the top predators, the lions, the sharks, the eagles, are always so much rarer than the gazelles and fish and mice they hunt? Why can an ecosystem support what seems like endless fields of grass, but not an army of wolves? The answer? Well, it's all in the energy. Okay, so to really track this flow of energy, we need a map. And in ecology, that map is organized by what are called trophic levels. It's really just a fancy way of describing where an organism sits in the food chain, basically what it eats and what eats it.
All right, so where does this whole energy journey begin? Well, for just about every ecosystem on Earth, it all starts with the sun. It's this incredible, powerful energy pouring down on us, and that's the ultimate source of power that plants and other producers are going to grab to kickstart the entire food web.
Now, the very first rule of this energy journey is super simple. It is a one-way street. Energy always flows from the bottom up, from the producers that make the energy to the consumers that eat them. It never, ever flows backwards.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is probably the most important part of our story. As that energy moves from one level to the next, it gets hit with this massive, unavoidable tax. And I mean massive. The vast majority of the energy is lost at every single step. This tax is governed by what ecologists call the 10% rule. It's a really powerful guideline that says, on average, only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level actually gets stored and passed on to the next. That's it, just 10%. And this is where that abstract number becomes, well, kind of shocking when you see it in action. Let's just say a plant stores 100 calories of energy from the sun. Okay, so a rabbit comes along and eats that plant. You'd think it gets 100 calories, right? Nope. It only gets to store about 10 of those calories in its own body. Then, a fox eats that rabbit, and it gets to store just one single calorie from that original 100. It's an incredible drop-off. So, you're probably wondering, where does that other 90% go? I mean, it doesn't just poof, vanish, right? Of course not. The organism uses it just to live, for breathing, for moving around, for keeping warm. It turns out in any energy transfer, a huge chunk is always lost as unusable heat. It's like a fundamental cost of doing business in the universe. You just can't get around it. Now, of course, that 10% is a general rule, a really good rule of thumb. Nature is always a bit more complicated. In the real world, this efficiency can be as low as 5%, or it can even get up to around 35% in some aquatic ecosystems. But the main takeaway is exactly the same. The trend is always one of massive energy loss. And this incredible inefficiency, this massive energy tax, it isn't just some quirky fact of biology. It's basically the master architect of the entire natural world. It dictates the shape and the size of every single food web on the planet. And the most immediate, obvious consequence is this. Food chains have a built-in length limit. It's hard-coded. Because you're losing 90% of the energy at each and every step, you just run out of fuel really, really fast. And that's exactly why you rarely, if ever, see food chains that are longer than 4 or 5 levels. There's just not enough energy left to support a 6th level. So this energy loss creates a structure that we call an energy pyramid. And right at the bottom, you have this massive foundation, the producers. These are your plants, your algae, all the things that capture that initial energy from the sun. This is the biggest level by far. Okay, now let's take one step up. Here we find the primary consumers. These are the herbivores that eat the plants. And because of that 90% energy tax we just talked about, this level has to be smaller. The total mass of all the rabbits in an ecosystem can never, ever be greater than the mass of the grass they eat. It's just not possible. And as we keep climbing higher, up to the carnivores, the secondary and tertiary consumers, the levels just get progressively smaller and smaller and smaller. And right here, this is the answer to that mystery we started with. Top predators are so rare because there is just very, very little energy left at the top of the pyramid to support them. And this brings us to an ironclad, unbreakable law of ecology.
Sometimes you can have a pyramid of numbers that looks weird, like thousands of insects living on one single big tree, but the pyramid of energy can never be inverted. You simply cannot have more energy at a higher level than the level below it. It's a fundamental rule.
Okay, so we've established that energy drops off dramatically as it moves up the food chain. But what if something else was moving along with it? Some kind of dangerous stowaway that, instead of getting weaker, actually gets stronger and more concentrated with every single step up.
Well, that phenomenon has a name. It's called biomagnification, and you can think of it as the dark twin of energy flow. It describes how certain toxic substances become more and more and more concentrated as you move up from prey to predator.
This is really the critical divide, the whole point right here. While energy is lost at each step up the pyramid, certain pollutants get passed on and they accumulate. A predator doesn't just eat one prey item, it eats many over its lifetime. So it's consuming and storing all the toxins from all the prey it eats, concentrating them in its own body and leading to this really dangerous buildup.
Now, not all pollutants do this. The ones that biomagnify tend to share a few key traits. For one, they're long-lived, so they don't break down easily in the environment. And crucially, they are fat-soluble. That means instead of being flushed out of an organism system, they get stored away in its fatty tissues for a long, long time.
And the takeaway from this is, well, it's pretty chillingly clear. The exact same math that makes top predators so rare also makes them the most vulnerable to these toxins. This is exactly what happened with the pesticide DDT. It accumulated all the way up the food chain and caused the shells of eagle eggs to become dangerously thin. The higher an animal is on the food chain, the bigger the toxic dose it ends up carrying.
And this brings us to one final and pretty personal question. Humans, right? Through our agriculture and our fishing, we often put ourselves at the very top of multiple food chains. So, knowing what we now know about how energy works, about rarity, and especially about biomagnification, what do you think that means for us?